Rob, if we stick on the whole UX subject now, I think something that I thought was quite interesting is that, like, I know Volvo, for example, what they did, which I thought was really smart quite early on in the whole UX UI movement, was them kind of taking a stand and going, well, Apple are pretty fucking great at what they do in terms of design and UI and UX, and same could be said for Google as well. So why don't we just use their system within our car rather than trying to reinvent the whole thing?
Yep.
How come more car companies didn't follow suit?
So I'll try and unravel this.
Okay.
I agree with their stance. I'll put that out there. I think their stance is correct. Why would I want to use a media player made by me rather than made by Apple or Google or Spotify or Deezer or as an experienced designer, that's what it's about. It's not about me drawing graphics that I think look cool and you're using them. It's like, what is going to make you most happy and connected to the objects that I'm giving you? So at the end of the day, it's like, I know if I'm doing a car, you getting in it, what do you want to do with your music? You want to play it from your phone. You want to play it. The first thing you want to do is you're like, right, if you've got Spotify, you're like, right, I want to get Spotify on here. Or if that's what you want to do. So I'm 100% in the boat, in the camp of that is the right way to approach these things. So then the next thing you do is, so what Google do, for example, now, a lot of systems are built on Android, but that's really more about the way that you put the system together. What they've done is they're doing something called Google Automotive Services, which you can buy into, and that basically gives you Google Maps, Google Play Store, Google Assistant in the car. So Volvo, Polestar, they've done that. Why wouldn't you? is basically my answer to that. Is like, yeah, absolutely. And I think Polestar product, if you look at Polestar 2, they just get that so right in that car. That experience, that interface is so right. And I think within car companies, we all know it. We've all been there. There's big departments and there's big and it's people's livelihoods, and it's and it's a difficult thing, not invented here, is a thing that any company has, and so it's people wrestling with that and understanding how they approach that new kind of world of maybe using a company like Google or Apple for some of those elements. But the interesting part of that is, I don't believe it doesn't mean that you need any less kind of people within the company. What it means is you can focus on what you do as a company and make it the best you possibly can, if that makes any sense. So focus on basically maps, media. If you let someone else do that, because that's some of the main stuff that people want to do when they get in a vehicle straight away. Focus on all the other cool stuff that you can do that really heightens the experience of that car. Lighting is a massive thing. Ambient lighting, huge thing. Haptics, which is a particular kind of area that I'm really interested in, like feel.
What is that? What is that?
So physical feel. So the problem that
sorry, excuse my ignorance. What is the word that you used?
Haptics. Yes.
Haptics.
So what?
Okay.
So that's just basically how does something feel when you use it?
Okay.
So if you get a physical button, for example, you can tune that physical button to feel like it's a tiny little horrible little thing or a really big and depending on what kind of vehicle you're driving, you might want it to react in a different way. If you're driving a Fiat 500, you don't want it to feel the same as a Lincoln Navigator.
Maybach, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You tune those things, and traditionally, up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, screens give you nothing, and that's one of their drawbacks. Is that if you're using a screen in a car, for example, it's giving you nothing back, and that could make it a little bit difficult to use. B, it means for me, there's very little connection to it, because a lot of our connection to things is touch, and so there's a lot of research gone into how do you bring feel into screens. And Audis, for example, they use a haptic engine, so touch the screen and it moves and it's giving you stuff back, and there's more and more stuff out there that's started to do that, and I think it's really important that for me, that you don't just go 100% into a flat interface, and you just lose so much in terms of the product that you're using and the customer interaction with it. That's kind of that's a really important area because I think there was this point where when it came to looking at an interior, people would just get to the point where they said, just put that in the screen. And it would just become this kind of dumping ground for put that in there, and it's like, well, that's kind of bullshit, isn't it? what's that? That's pretty lazy. And more and more now, like I think you start to see companies coming out and saying we're not going to get rid of everything. Like Audi have come out and said, I think that their last concept car, they were like, we're not going to get rid of all the physical controls. They have an importance,
I think this,
and I think that was quite and Mazda have said it for quite a few years. They've been really strong on it. They were like, there's a place for physical, for visual interaction and for touch interaction on the screen, but we also believe that there's a place for physical stuff. And physical interactions, and I think I almost feel like we got to peak screen, maybe, or maybe we're just getting there. We're going to come down the other side of the curve.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think there was this thing. There was obviously a moment a few years ago where it felt like, whoa, if you have everything in screen, it's like super futuristic. And I fucking knew immediately. The first time I think it was on an F-Type where the car's off and it's just blank and you don't see anything there. And I was just like, I knew this is not for me. I'm not into this at all. And I think that now it's like, to make something physical is almost luxurious again, and I'm hoping that we are.
Well, that's a very good point that you make there as well, because the ubiquity of screens creates that situation. If everything has a screen in it, then how do you make something luxurious? How do you make something opulent, premium, if that's what you're about as a company? With a screen. Now, and there are ways to do it, and there's obviously the craftsmanship of what you're doing visually on that screen, and the way you shape the motion graphics and what you do with that. But then there's also so we've got that, and then what else do we want to do with it? What can we physically do with screens? And the problem that car companies have always had with screens as well is if you want to do something different, like you want to go different shapes, you want to go different ratios, the screen suppliers aren't interested because they're set up to make like 1 million screens.
Right.
They don't give a shit about 10,000 screens or 50,000 screens. They're like, sorry, but we're not retooling. Or we will retool, but you're going to have to pay us. And the money is astronomical, even by a car company's standards. And that's why, when you get in cars, you see the same rectangles, because there's very little ability to do anything, at a production level about going different. Every time I've ever talked about doing things differently, you end up kind of where you were, because the cost is, as I said, you have to think strategically across, maybe 10 car lines to really be able to make something change because of the cost involved in it. So, to create something premium becomes, or not premium, that's the wrong word, to create something that has an individual character to whatever vehicle or brand that you've got, it becomes difficult when you are essentially losing a little bit of control of some of the, some of the defining areas in that interior.
There's also the safety aspect of it as well. Like without autonomy yet, where something with a physical button, obviously you've got feedback and it doesn't require you to look down. This is obviously, this is becoming more of an obvious issue at the moment, I think. Especially obviously for drivers, because on some cars you are changing your air conditioner with a fucking screen.
So I think there's a responsibility there to the experienced designer, to the people that are doing the on-screen graphics and there's a couple of things. One is to do something that doesn't bury information that you need, behind a multitude of menus and screens. It's like you need to surface everything, and you can use technology to do that quite well as well. Like, to systems that learn what the customer uses as well and surfaces those without them really having to do anything. It learns what you're doing and provides it to you. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing is as well, placement of, and this is the interesting thing for a UX designer, is you kind of see that you have your foot in a multitude of different camps when you're doing stuff, because in this regard, it's very much gets into human factors and ergonomics, and saying, really, where does this stuff need to be? Like a screen, for example, needs to be as high up as you can get it. So, if you're looking out of the car, like you say, you don't want to be doing this, you just want to be straight ahead. And then it's, okay, so that's where that needs to be. And then discussing with the interior team, right, really, this kind of wants to be here. What are we going to do, and kind of working it through. So from a safety perspective, I think it's obviously key. And there's a lot that goes on within car companies, obviously, to make sure that, that things are placed and surfaced in the right way.
When you get in an environment where virtually everything is digital, are you kind of is there kind of a standard menu that you get as a starting point to start developing dial sizes and all that sort of stuff?
Well, all that kind of stuff, really. Yes. There's kind of like naturally ergonomic positions and sizes and places that, as kind of any designer that works in that area will kind of know, and can kind of just use as a hygiene level kind of base for where they go. I think where we're getting to now, though, is voice will start to take a huge amount of prominence within systems, and voice obviously gives you a lot of ability to not worry about where your eyes are, and to just tell the car what you want it to do. And natural voice and natural voice engines are getting really good, and also people weren't that comfortable with it. Maybe 5 years ago, voice systems weren't very good. So you'd speak to the system and it wouldn't understand you, and then you look like an idiot to whoever is in the car, and you don't ever use it again because you look like an idiot. So you're like, I'm never doing that again. Whereas now the proliferation of voice assistants means that people are used to it and they work. So people are getting so much used to, saying, I had a Volvo XC90, it's great, Google Play, blah, 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 and it just off it goes, does it? Google take me to, hey Google, take me to wherever, and the nav system does it, and things like that are a really big thing now. And I think pretty much any new vehicle that comes out now has a really spanking voice engine in it that people will be using and get very used to.
So this is not something that's this is not something that's working through your mobile phone. This is actually something that's in the car's interface.
Well, cars have had it, for years. Have had like voice engines, but they've not been very good, basically. And so the way it works, I think the way it worked in my XC90 at the time was you had to have Android Auto open, and then you can use Google. But now they're being embedded within the actual infotainment system on the car, so you can choose what voice assistant you want to use. You can use Siri, or you can use Cortana, or you can use Google Assistant, or you can, and they're there and ready to go. And that as well as that offering a good bit of technology to the car company, for the customer, it's about end-to-end experience. So by that we mean bits of technology that you are always in contact with. So I don't want a different voice assistant in my car to the one I use at home to the one I use at work. You want it to go all the way through those different scenarios, and so that you really do have a personal assistant, that thing
right.
that you're interacting with all the time. And we're getting to the place where that exists, so it's like, it's the Alexa that you use, that you talk to at home, is the same Alexa that you talk to in your car, is the same Alexa that you talk to when you get to work, and humans love that because we don't have to think about it. It's just second nature.
But Rob, this is only happening with those car companies, that are saying, okay, we recognize that Apple and Google are the best at this, so we
every infotainment provider within the automotive sector, and there are many kind of companies that actually build systems. They all have their new systems. They will all interface with these voice assistants. So I'd say, like, within 2 or 3 years, if you got in any new vehicle, you could get in it and be like, I want to use and describe whichever voice assistant it was, and it'd work. It's really become in development over the last couple of years, kind of just a given that you're going to do that, because it's a technology that everybody is getting very used to outside of cars. And one of the main things that chief and director level user experience designers want is to remove the barriers that have that are there for customers. It's like, you want customers to get into a car and be like, oh, this just works, I love it. That's the key. This just works, I love it. Great. So that means all the things that you use on a daily basis, we want to be able for you to use in the car.
Well, that's definitely the smartest thing to do. Especially now, given how much technology we have to constantly familiarize ourselves with. There's a meme that's floating around somewhere saying, like, UX is a bit like, telling a joke.
That's right. If you've got to
explain it, it's rubbish.
Shit.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rob, what is your stance on gesture controls? Because this is something that I love to touch things. I love to feel things. I don't know what is your stance on it?
I personally, I've never used any that I've liked particularly There was one for I think Jag XF Sport Brake. You could do the sunblind, or you could do the and just do this, and it would go back.
And that's cool. That's okay.
That was cool because it made sense. That it's an interesting conundrum with human beings. It's the same as voice. It's the same as me saying, put on the air conditioning and the car plays, play some music, yes. and I look like an idiot. It's the same as if I'm sat in a car and I'm like doing something and it doesn't do it. I look like an idiot, and immediately I will never do it again. It's like, to get me to do that again is going to take a very, very long time and a lot of trust. And gesture has not taken off particularly well in cars for that reason. I think companies that have offered it, consumers have kind of used it and it's not worked, or they've just felt like they look stupid, and then it's like gone nowhere. And so it's the same as, for me, it's the same as various companies whenever they're offering like eyewear, like Google Glass or years ago, stuff like that. It's like, to get somebody to wear something that makes them look a bit stupid, it's not going to happen, is it?
No, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
They have to look cool. If it looks cool, people will do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing about gesture, is it's got stuck in that area of, no one's quite worked out how to do it in a way where it's intuitive and it doesn't kind of fall over. Because I think there will be a place for it. But it's working out what a really natural, like, I can't remember what car it was. I think it's BMW's. Like, if the phone rings, you can just wave it away, and it will turn and it will hang the phone up, and that kind of makes sense. That's quite nice. But I think there have to be quite kind of understandable, relatable things that aren't that difficult to do.
Yeah, because you don't want to have to learn fucking sign language to be able to interact with the system. Yeah, but I mean, I like the idea of the blind.
I mean, you get an XF that does that. So I think BMW, the 5 Series, they launched quite a lot of gesture, but I don't think it really took off. But yeah, some of them are quite good. Like I said, like just go away. Don't
that's
pick that
cool.
up. It's quite nice.
That's cool.
But I actually saw a research project at one of the companies I was working at, where they replaced the stalks with gesture control. And I was like, how on earth is that going to work? But it was quite clever. It could recognise, so yeah, you're driving. It could recognise those hands are driving hands. They're not stalks. And then you put your hands and did stuff like this, and it would do what you would do with a physical stalk. But the big but was, why? Like, is this better than some stalks? And it's like, no. So, do you know what I mean? And that's always one of the key areas when we're talking about technology, is why are we doing this? Is this better than what currently exists? Or is there a roadmap for it to be better? And this is kind of part of the journey. Because I think if it's just arbitrary, then that is definitely not what a designer wants to do. You don't do kind of just arbitrary stuff. It's that's kind of surface entertainment, isn't it? Which has its place, but I don't quite think it makes sense when you're trying to use something.
The big thing, I'm just thinking out loud now. Like, as I said, I really like the idea of this, the blind, for example. That's a great example. The big question is, like, if you do that and you want to cancel it, that's where it's like, what do you intuitively do to cancel it? And then this is always when these new innovative systems will kind of show if they're as good as what we think they are, or if they need some more work.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. And And that's why they require a lot of research and testing as well with people to say, like, how do you feel about this? How does this make you feel? What would you do? And it's really, people. You could take kind of 10 people and ask them the same question. You get really, really different answers. And that's always an interesting thing about this area of work is how do we create something that that satisfies the most amount of people the most amount of the time.
I mean, there's so much to be said for the feedback of a physical object, and it seems like when you're describing the stalk situation, this is a prime example of that. Like, I can't, it's like, okay, great. Like, you could gesture up, I don't know, to maybe go to indicate right and down to indicate left. But number one, why? And also, what if you gesture right and you made a mistake and you want to like, the big thing is, like, how do you negate what you've just done? This is something that I can't imagine would come intuitively. But I stand
absolutely
to be corrected. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that's the key to a lot of this is really, really thinking about why are we applying a bit of technology when we're doing it. There are some great use cases, and there are others where actually, just doing doing it how it's been done, but in a bit with a bit of a fresher take, or reducing complexity, but it's still being something that I'm physically interacting with is probably the right way to go.
Rob, I was wondering where we were looking. Well, where from your experience, car companies have generally been looking at in terms of finding innovative solutions to bring into cars in with regard to UX UI, because we historically like traditional OEMs. If you're just talking about design, for example, we always have the same thing. Like, everybody's going like, what should we do over here? Okay, well, look what Audi have done, or look what BMW have done. And then then when you go into Audi or BMW, you see that actually they go, well, look what Jaguar have done. And everybody's kind of borrowing from each other. But the true innovation happens when you maybe look outside of the confines of your sector and bring in something that works really well elsewhere. But actually, if you applied it to what we do, you could come up with something really innovative.
I think it's a hard one, because if you were to, so maybe like 5 years ago, you look outside of cars, you look outside of automotive in UX, and you'd be looking at, Apple or Google, or and I think you even look at them now, and they've got to a point where they're like, the next iPhone comes out, what does it do differently? Not that much, And so I actually think reductionism is going to be a thing, and I think it started. Like I said, I think we got to peak screen almost. I mean, the markets are different, obviously. But I think if we were to take a European market approach, I think peak screen has been achieved, and I think it will start to be simplify and remove. And even actually, if you look at Tesla, what they've done is they use their over-the-air ability, their over-the-air updates, and their telemetry to track what people use within the system, and stuff that's not used, they turn off. Because they're just like, no one uses
that's
this.
Pretty cool, yeah.
And it's like, well, that makes a load of sense. Don't do stuff that people don't use. Do stuff that people do use. The other interesting thing within Tesla, for example, is I don't know if you noticed they've gone to a slightly different screen size, and they've put a cluster back in Model 3. And one of the reasons for that is because they want you to be able to use that center screen for streaming content and playing video games. And they want you, and their take on that is obviously autonomy when the car goes fully autonomous, and what do you do when you charge? So when I'm sitting there and I'm charging my car, and it takes, say it takes like 45 minutes to an hour.
Fuck.
What am I going to be doing? And they're like, well, why don't you watch Netflix or play a game? And they've even got to the point where you can play driving games using the steering wheel on the, obviously the car has to be off, but and they're like, that's so it's almost like the innovation sometimes is coming from different use cases for the car, to a certain extent. So I think there's it's going to kind of go two ways. It's going to be reductionism for some brands that are like, right, we're going to take stuff away, and a lot of that I think is linked to mindfulness and wellness and relaxation and things like this. You create a space where actually a lot of luxury comes from removing things. So that's some brands I think would go in that direction, and then the other direction, like I said, is that portal in the car is now streaming service, and truly is an entertainment portal for when you're doing something else in your car. Like in some cultures, people sleep in their cars a lot. They sleep in their cars at lunchtime. They actually eat in their cars. And so within that culture, you're looking at, well, what do you do inside the car that's removed from the act of actually using it as a conveyance? So I think they're the kind of two ways that it's going to go in terms of kind of new and innovative kind of technologies within it.
It's going to be very interesting to see what interiors look like in like 10 years time, because at the moment, if you look at a Model 3 interior, when it's all off, you go like, whoa, it's so clean. It almost looks like there's something missing there. But if you've got like this anxiety every time you turn on that screen because you don't know how to use it and it's too complicated, then that kind of negates the notion of having something that is reduced and stripped down.
The other option for reduction is reduction in technology, but not reduction in in content, if you know what I mean. And I think it'd be really interesting to see, are there any companies that are brave enough to go, right, we're going to go really full in on this, and we're going to really pare the technology back down to like, you could hardly, there's no physical representation of that technology, but it's there. And what I'm giving you is quite traditional in the sense of I'm going to give you, materials, and you look at things that are quite interesting, like like iNext, and it's like this is a piece of architecture. This is a home interior, and it's got screens that are like on a wall, like they would be at home. And the next stage of that is just don't have the screens, because the technology can be represented in, like I said, if you've got the trust in the technology, you don't need to see it. When you talk to Alexa, you don't see anything, but you're going like, Alexa, play me this. Alexa, tell me the time. Alexa, can you play? I'm planning my journey to such and such. And there's no visual representation of it, but you're doing it and you trust it. And so that's the next one. I mean, I can imagine a Rolls Royce being like that. You know what I mean? All day long. I can see that, because that's a natural kind of, it's like you've got a butler, It's like,
Yeah.
and I think there are, someone will be brave enough to start to do those things, I think. But as you said earlier, a lot of the time, car companies are looking at other car companies, aren't they? And going like, okay, what are they doing? And what are they doing? And,
But that's not the game plan, though, is it? I don't think that's a smart thing to do. I mean, I think it's good to have an awareness, but ultimately, if you really are wanting to really improve the situation, it's not. This is why everything is kind of very similar and the same, and it's
it's bravery, isn't it? It's being that you have to be very brave, I think, as a company to really do something very different, because you do need to sell your product. And we've probably all been there where, like, the sales team come in, they're like, well, we need this many features to compete with this company. And if you don't have these, then, we're not going to sell any cars, and at which point it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. I remember being in a meeting when a sales guy said he could charge so many £100 more per vehicle based on the screen size going up like this, and I was like, really?
But that may, but that, again, that may be true in the short term, but like the real long-term play is not that. And that's
yes, you're right. You end up, I think, and that's what it's about with the companies that have got really strong design leadership. They get they get that, and they know, and they'll develop new strategies and exciting places to go, which are based on not that kind of nitty gritty, but and that's, I think, as we all know in the car industry as well, that's part of the real skill of developing a car, is like, there's your vision and you've got to stick with it. Because it takes a long time.
Yeah,
it takes a long time to do. So it's easy to be kind of blown all over the place, isn't it? And you've got to be like, no, that's what we are gonna do, and you just keep going forward and doing it. And I think you can see the car companies that kind of clearly have an idea of where they're going to go, because you kind of feel the strength of it in terms of each car comes out and you're like, you see where they're going, if that makes any sense.
Who do you think's nailing it with regard to that?
Who do I think is nailing it? It's really funny, isn't it? In the car, we're all very critical of the of kind of cars within the car industry, and we're never particularly
complimentary
about anyone, are we? I'm just trying to. I think Mercedes-Benz for quite a while, I really understood what they were doing. And I found it personally very complex, overly complex, but I really got where they were going. And it's interesting what they've done now with the S-Class. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it seemed to. I always thought, they were like, you had like two screens like this, and I thought it's just going to go like all the way across, or it's going to be like one screen, and that's kind of. And every time you saw one of their cars, it's like, yeah, they've done that, and they've done that, and you're like, yeah. And I remember we had an A-Class, and you open the door, and what they always did really well was, the minute you open the door, you were like, I know where all my money went. Like, if that makes any sense. You were like, yeah, I got a lot for my money. But they've done the S-Class, and they've done something very different. Although I think what they've done is they're going really heavily into HUD, and I think I think that's cool, because I think HUD is really good. I love using it. I think it's great. So I kind of understand where they're going with that. But I'm not answering your question.
No, it's okay. I mean, I know Mercedes, they definitely do. They do beautiful interiors, and I think the materials and finishes and all that stuff, to your point of saying like, okay, I know where my money's gone. But in terms of I
think Porsche, to be honest, but I have to hold my hands up and say I'm a Porsche lover, so it's kind of, I'm massively biased.
I'm a Porsche lover too, but No, sorry, I'll stop interrupting you, Rob.
No, so it's awful this, because you're always thinking I'm going to get myself in trouble, but but I wish in a way in the Taycan they hadn't put another screen in it. I kind of wish that they'd stuck with what they've done in all their other cars, and the reason I say that is because I always loved their clarity of purpose, if that makes sense. It's like you get in a Cayenne or a Panamera or a 911 or a 718 and you get in it and you know exactly what this car is about. You know, you go like, this is a driving machine. As well as, and I think about 911, which is great. It does everything brilliantly, but it always had that clarity of, it's like you get in it and it knows exactly what it's about. And in the Taycan, they made a decision to go with a screen there and to kind of remove the kind of shifter, and which I get, but just it would have been cool if they'd have gone, no, it's still a Porsche, so it's going to be like this. That would have been cool. Having said that, it does have an extremely cool, like the binnacle, the cluster, and the way they deal with that. Again, they've always had this really definable, this is the dial layout of a Porsche, you know. And it's to keep that I think is really cool, because they have that really defined kind of brand DNA to their user controls, which I think is really cool. So I'll say Porsche. You know what, that car specifically is one of those products where it's a compromise between, like, you know, dad wanting his toy, but also being able to justify it to the wife as it being a family wagon without it feeling compromised in any way. I got the luxury of driving one for a couple of days, and it's a very cool bit of kit. You know, it's like, this is a very cool,
I love it.
Very cool. I haven't had the opportunity to drive the e-tron GT, because apparently that's an extremely cool bit of kit as well, with great sound design, which is another really interesting area of UX. Like massively. I mean, actually, that's a point where you were talking about technology and innovation and where it's going. Actually, sound design within cars is a massive area for innovation that's very, that's really quite new. And the Audi e-tron GT is a very good example of, they really nailed the sound design in that car, I think, extremely well.
Are you not just talking about the kind of engine noises that it makes?
Yeah, so you're talking about, there's a wide remit really for sound design within the car, and I was just working, just come out of a job where we were doing a lot of sound, and you're creating a soundscape for the entire vehicle. So what you're doing is you're doing interior drivetrain noise, and that's how we would define it, drivetrain noise. So it's like, we're not trying to replicate a V8 or a V12 or whatever. Like, what should this car sound like? You've got you've got that interior noise, and then you've got the exterior sound projection of the car as well. So you can hear the car outside, and what should it sound like outside? Should it sound the same as it does on the inside, or what should it do? And then you've got all the system sound design within the car. So kind of when you get in it, what does it sound like? Does it welcome you with an ident? Does it, what does it do? Does it project that on the outside of the car as well? Then when you're using a system, what are all the system sounds? And you create these big soundscapes, basically. And we kind of went through, basically saying, like, here's a feel for where we'd like to get to. And then, working with the sound designers, you'd sit down, and we went through like 130 sounds that you're like, that tone's right, that's all right. It's really interesting to kind of get into it and shaping the character or something. It's really interesting, because you know, it was like, okay, if you're talking about what should this car sound like when I'm driving it, it's like, you don't want it to be artificial. You want it to come from somewhere. That makes sense. So like, what does an electric drivetrain sound like? And then how do we kind of shape and amplify and characterize that into something a bit more that then becomes the sound of this car legitimately, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how this evolves, because it could just be that people just don't give a shit and they just wanted to make the sound of a fucking V8 or of the Starship Enterprise.
Well, but that's it, exactly. You're no longer confined to like this set of sounds. It's then like so sci-fi references are obviously make a load of sense. You know, like you've got, they make total sense and are used, you know. And I think, obviously, if you've created a product like a Porsche or an Audi or a GT, an e-tron GT, then people that drive those cars, that they do want that kind of connection and emotional attachment and interest. So they are interested in kind of where that comes from, you know. And BMW have got Hans Zimmer doing all their work for them. I mean, you know,
well, that's
cool is that?
That's very cool. And that's, I think these are things to get excited about, you know, rather than just thinking like, oh yeah, well, you know, the golden age of motoring's gone and everything's shit. Like, there's going to be a lot of cool situations that are going to come up in the future. And I think that's a great example of that.
I mean, exactly, you know, to have somebody of that ability and that, prominence kind of doing that work, really, really cool, you know, and it opens up again another area for people to get involved with vehicle design as well. I think that's the interesting opportunity as well. You know, from when I first started, from when I was a student, and it was like you could be an exterior designer, an interior designer, a clay modeler, or an A-list modeler. Like they were the 4 jobs that you could do. Now, fuck me, man, there are so many things you can go and do, you know, within a car design studio that are all massively relevant and interesting. And it also, for that studio, opens up people that come from very different backgrounds that are very interesting, like creatively come from different areas, and bring that in, which I think is really exciting as well. You know, it opens up loads of different avenues for creativity, which I think is very interesting.
100%. I think what's really been a noticeable difference over the last, say, 5 to maybe even 10 years is seeing more of that. You know, it's like it's not out of, like, based on what you just said now, it's not out of the realms of possibilities for a car design studio to hire a musician, you know, or a videographer, or you're seeing all of this stuff in not just in UX, but in visualization departments. You know, they're hiring fucking coders. They are hiring people that have come from the movie industry. I mean, a lot of it's come from the movie industry, gaming. It's very, very interesting, and it starts to kind of blur the lines as to, like, you know, what is this what is this company all about? You know, it's and what is it? Yeah,
which then kind of completes that circle of, actually we're a service provider, you know, and it's like and you can imagine, like, when you're saying to someone, I say, who worked on this, man? And it's like, oh well, you know, they got this guy, they got these people in, and they worked on, you know, like Red Dead Redemption, and then you've got these people that were like designing scents for Gucci, and then you got these people, and all of a sudden there's a relevance there, which to a demographic which wasn't there before, you know, and that's where I think it gets, you know, exciting for that new wave, that new generation, and where the excitement kind of, you know, there shouldn't be this feel that, you know, the car is dead. What are we all going to do? We're all going to be sitting at home mourning the death of the vehicle and watching old episodes of Top Gear. It's like there's so much innovation and creativity that's now actually flooding in, which is a really nice thing, I think.
It's absolutely, Rob, and I think this has been such an interesting discussion, and it's definitely changed the way that I look at UX design. We had this big after Dieselgate, the Potsdam studio, which was an advanced design center, turned into what they rebranded a future center, and there was this huge influx of UX designers, and it kind of it did become quite a lot like us versus them sort of thing, and we all started it was very easy to fall down the trap of just associating UX with disconnected millennials, and it's so much more than that, because it's like it is literally like you could literally have a musician that worked on a fucking Smiths record or I don't know, a Dead Mouse production. Working in a car company, for example, or as you said, somebody that worked for Gucci designing cologne. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting.
And it's really cool when you see. I mean, what I love is when you see all these people, in a space, and you can almost see like people getting these ideas as they kind of bounce off each other, And that's I find that really inspiring, when you get to be in that environment, and that's one of the gifts, I think, of being in the kind of environments that we get to be in, is that you do get to meet these people and you do get to be around that, and that's a pretty cool place to be, I think.
Yeah, especially when you can actually see a feasible way that some of these ideas can play out, because there's no end of kind of dreamers out there coming up with brilliant abstract ideas, but it seems like now that these seem, which would have been crazy 10 years ago, ideas are like, they make sense now, and you can see them actually being applied to what we do.
I think that's one of the benefits that kind of software and electronics have actually brought along, like the electrical architectures and the software within cars is now at a level that you can have ideas and implement them without being in the car, without being next to the car, without and that in itself creates a huge amount of opportunity. The fact that, we all know, don't we, with Tesla, to wake up in the morning and they're like, send you an email, and that, by the way, your car now drives itself. It's like, that's one of the coolest things in the world.
Yeah, it's pretty mad, yeah.
And again, like, one of the things that quite a few car companies that I've worked for that we've said, what's like one of the worst things about owning a car? And one of the worst things about owning a car is you buy a new car. Well, you buy a new car. The first time you then interact with that brand is going to be when you have to take it back for a service or something's gone wrong, which means that the first time you interact with the brand that sold you the car, other than the product itself, is negative.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I've got to go and get this fixed, blah, 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 which is like the worst thing in the world for a brand. It's like what a brand wants to be doing is saying, aren't we great? We want you to eulogize. We want you to go out there and be like, this is the best company in the world and I drive one of their cars. So if you can pick up a car and then in a month's time, I can send you an email in the morning and say, Sam, really cool to have you on board. We've sent you this, bang, and your car does it and you've got a new thing. That's a really positive affirmation of a brand, isn't it? Yeah. And it's like, so that in itself is a really fucking cool place to be able to get to as well. So, and then you've got, you've got to think about that as a strategy within the company. Like, okay, so now when I'm creating a product for a customer, the end point is no longer when I've sold them the car. You know, in terms of the designer's input to their experience, it's now that's like the first part. It's like, okay, we've sold the product, brilliant. How do we keep them enjoying that product? How do we keep enriching their experience? You know, and that again opens up like just the need for more input and more creativity. You know.
Yeah. Rob, dude, that was really, really awesome, really insightful. I learned a lot. It's kind of made me look at things in a different way, and I know that you know, there's a lot of other young designers out there are going to maybe reconsider their thoughts on UX and UI and electrification as well.
It would be fun. I'd love to get, you know, I'm trying to get to as many people as I can, because I think the other thing is, and I say this to kind of UXers as well, is like UXers have got to get out of their own way sometimes as well, because, you know, a lot of the time you ask someone what do they do, UX, and they'll tell you everything is UX. You're like, you're like, I can't quantify that. Get out. You know. So I think there's a lot to be done to bring it together. You know, like you're saying, I totally understand this kind of us and them approach. You know, the us and them that can be created and happen within culture sometimes, within studios, and I think what it's actually about is, a lot of the time it's about a UX designer, senior UX designer, chief, whatever, kind of communicating with everyone and saying, we're not here to take your roles to be more important than you, to try and land grab this. We're actually here to facilitate you doing even more of the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
And that's actually what it's about. And that, I think, would be like really helpful within a lot of organisations to try and get that across and to have that approach, you know.
Rob, thank you, dude. That was really, really good.